Well, thank you so much, Elliot. Good morning. I'm delighted and grateful to be here with you. It's been a real pleasure to meet you and get to know you and your work. Um, I appreciate the dedication to my mom, and just reflecting on what Ms. Batista said in the closing of her remarks. It reminded me of something my mom said to me when I was in a point of distress many months ago, frustrated by the lack of progress on a climate change project I was working on, and just not feeling the juice and inspiration that day. And my mom, in spite of the fact that she turned 98 this year and had, slowed down with age, she said something to the effect that's to me of, listen, you do what you can. You get up in the morning with the values that you have, your sense of purpose, you set your North Star, and you do what you can. And I think those words are really important to remind ourselves of today. When I think of my father's story, for example, he was just a little boy from a little town in northern Wisconsin. His dad was a doctor, his mom was a nurse. And he was inspired at the age of 10 to run for public office because he wanted to be a public servant and help people. And that inspiration came from watching a speech sitting on his father's shoulders, speech of Robert LaFollette Jr., speaking from the back of a whistle-stop train tour, which is how politicians frequently campaigned in those days. And my father grew up, he was just a little boy, but he had a really big dream to make a difference with his life. And that dream came true beyond his wildest imagination. And certainly Earth Day is a representation of that. And I think of the power of individual action, the unimaginable outcomes that arise out of us simply getting up in the morning and operating from our place of values, focused on our North Star, and doing what we can with what we have, with all of our imperfections, but the purity of our heart and our values. My father did that, my mother did, excuse me, my father did that, my mother did that, and they made a big difference in this world in really unimaginable ways. And I think of people like Rosa Parks. Could she have known that her simple act of defiance, refusing to move to the back of the bus in 1964, would change the trajectory of the civil rights movement? She couldn't possibly have known that would be the outcome. Could Greta Thunberg, whose simple act of protest before the Swedish parliament would launch a climate youth movement that changed the national conversation, the international conversation, the global conversation around the issue of climate change? She couldn't possibly have known the outcome. And any more than my father could have known that this simple idea that he had, after laboring for years and years and experiencing much defeat and many setbacks, could he have possibly known that this simple idea that he came up with on an airplane in 1969 after inspecting the largest oil spill in American history at the time off the Santa Barbara coast of California? He reads an article about how college campuses' protests about the morality of the Vietnam War had changed the national conversation about that war. And he decided to call for a teach-in on the environment. It was an aha moment for him. He never could have imagined the outcome. 20 million people gathered on that day, the largest event in American history. It launched the environmental movement. More environmental laws were passed in the decade that followed than any other time in American history. And this was a multi-generational, bipartisan, socially just call to action on the part of my father. We're going to watch now a short film. It's about 7 minutes, which I recruited Varshini Prakash, the youth activist and co-founder of the Sunrise Movement, and Bob Inglis, former conservative Republican congressman from North Carolina, a former climate skeptic, recruited the two of them to bookend this story, because I believe united we can solve this. I believe in building bridges to create unity and action around climate change. My father believed in that, and I created this film not just to be a reflection on the past, which of course is personally important to me, but to also help us look to the future and build that brighter future, so that we're celebrating a 100th anniversary of Earth Day. And I'll have just a couple more words to say when we close, but Elliot, if you wouldn't mind, please cue up the film.
Our goal is not just an environment of clean air and water and scenic beauty while forgetting about the worst environments in America. Our goal is an environment of decency, quality, and mutual respect for all human beings and all other living creatures. Our goal is a decent environment in its broadest and deepest sense, and it will require a long, sustained political, moral, ethical, and financial commitment far beyond any commitment ever made by any society in the history of man.
My name is Tia Nelson. I am the daughter of Gaylord Nelson, the founder of Earth Day. My father was an extraordinary dad. He was an extraordinary leader. Growing up as his daughter, it was mostly a great privilege, but also I felt a heavy sense of duty to public service and to making a difference with my life. I work for the Outrider Foundation. Our goal is to educate people about big global challenges like climate change. One of my favorite quotes from my father was delivered on the eve of the first Earth Day in 1970. He said, "Ecology is a big science,
not a narrow one. It's a big concept, and it is concerned with all the ramifications of all the relationships of all living creatures to each other and their environment."
So when he talked about the environment, he talked about ecology and environment in the broadest sense, in the most inclusive sense. That idea resonated with students across the country. Collectively, they made a difference that was unforeseeable.
This movement and this fight is about all of us, because what is more fundamental than the air that we breathe, than water, than the soil that we stand on, than the land that we love? Like, what is more fundamental to every single one of us than that? My name is Varshini Prakash. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, and I am one of the co-founders of Sunrise Movement. We are building a movement of young people all across this nation to stop the climate crisis and create millions of good jobs for our generation in the process. And when I began looking back into what the first Earth Day was like, what it meant, the level of people who got involved, the kind of political action, I think for me, Earth Day now is about getting back to our roots.
My father was brilliant at working across the aisle to build consensus. He knew when to compromise, he knew when to stick to his principles. Think of all of the important environmental laws that were passed after that first Earth Day, and they were passed with significant support from both parties.
For 6 years, I said that climate change was nonsense, in as much as I represented Greenville-Spartanburg, South Carolina, probably one of the reddest districts, the reddest state in the nation. That was the end of the inquiry for me. So I admit that's fairly ignorant, but that's the way it was for 6 years. So I'm Bob Inglis, and I run an outfit called RepublicEN.org, where convincing conservatives that they're really good on climate and that they've got the answer. It's free enterprise innovation. My son, the eldest of our 5 kids, came to me. He was voting for the first time because he just turned 18. And he said to me, "Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment." It's the first of a 3-step metamorphosis for me. And step 2 was going to Antarctica with a science committee, seeing the evidence in the ice core drillings. Step 3 was another science committee trip. It's there that at a stopover at the Great Barrier Reef, great blessing there was meeting an Australian climate scientist named Scott Heron, and just being inspired by his faith to act on climate change.
When Bob spoke about climate change while serving in the United States Congress, he was primaried and he lost his election. He was attacked for speaking the words climate change. This was a transformative moment in his life and led to him dedicating his whole career today to addressing the climate change challenge.
For young people growing up in this country, we have been defined by the climate crisis. People who have been born after the year 2000 have never lived a year on this planet that wasn't one of the hottest years on record. We are the climate generation. And so now, at a young age, we have realized that if our politicians aren't going to do something about this problem, then we have to take matters into our own hands.
Through leadership of people like Varshini, the youth movement has been energized in the last year in ways that resemble what was happening almost 50 years ago when the first Earth Day occurred.
There comes a place where activism drives even the crustiest old-timer to decide to get involved.
I don't think there's any other issue viewed in its broadest sense, which is as critical to mankind as the issue of the quality of the environment in which we live.
Environmentalism is not a partisan issue. Environmentalism is a quality of life issue for all of us.
You know, I'm very optimistic about the future. I think we're going to solve climate change. It's going to be that conservatives come together with progressives to figure out we're literally in this together.
This is about not just changing light bulbs, this is about changing our politics. And if anything, we will be successful because we do it together.
I want the youth of today to know that I have done everything that I can to ensure on the 100th anniversary of Earth Day, we are celebrating a brighter future. We're at a critical moment in history. We have an opportunity to address the greatest environmental challenge of our time.
Are we able? Yes. Are we willing? That's the unanswered question.
Thank you so much for sharing that incredible video, Tia. Really inspiring. You know, I feel called to action. It's great to see such an important and broad coalition of voices that are really involved in this challenge. You know, whether it's youth climate activists or Bob Inglis, you know, it's really an issue that affects all of us. I know you wanted to speak, you know, a few words after the video, so I can hand it over to you now.
Oh, but yeah, I'll just thank you so much, Elliot. I loved making that film. I loved developing a relationship with Varshini Prakash and with Bob English, both just incredible individuals. And what was interesting to me was they have very different solutions to the climate crisis, which I think is understandable considering their backgrounds and life experience. That didn't matter to me. And at the end of the day, it didn't matter to them either. They weren't there to disagree about whether it was the Green New Deal or a revenue neutral, border adjusted carbon tax that was the right answer. We knew that we need every tool in the toolbox. We need every solution at this point. We need deploy every solution we can. What mattered to me was that Bob and Varshini, both in their own authentic voice, identified this issue is the most urgent environmental challenge humanity has ever faced, and they came to the table to work together. And that was very inspiring to me. The first Earth Day, my father worked very hard to create, build bridges and reach broad constituencies. And I think that's a critical thing to think about. I also I have the pleasure of working a bit with Brent Suter, the pitcher for the Milwaukee Brewers. And Brent is a great sustainability advocate, a great environmentalist, and he is a marvelous addition to helping me tell this story, because people like Bob Inglis, Bob reaches people that I can't reach or wouldn't likely reach, as does Varshini. as does Brent Suter. I'm not much of a sports fan. He can speak to the urgency and of this issue and reach people that I can't. And so my goal at this point, at this juncture in my journey to make a difference, is to help build those bridges, to bring together diverse voices, so we come together at the table and work through an appropriate response to the challenge. And I just want to thank you and the audience, remind everyone that individual action matters, that each of us has a role to play, and to find that path, to find that North Star, to do what you can within your means, and know that unimaginable things can happen. And so with that, I just want to thank everyone and wish you great luck with your conference.